My name is Emma, and from the outside, people would probably think my marriage to Ryan was doing just fine. We weren't the kind of couple who constantly posted smiling photos or exchanged sweet lines in front of other people. We were more practical than that. Each of us handled our part, and together we kept life running like a machine that made no sound. Ryan went to work carrying his own pressures, and I handled everything else so that when he opened the door and came home, everything was still moving in rhythm. Before the promotion, Ryan had always been ambitious. That much I knew. He hated feeling inferior, hated being underestimated, and whenever things went wrong at work, the atmosphere in the house grew noticeably heavier. Some nights, he would toss his keys onto the table harder than usual, sit in silence for 10 minutes, then snap because dinner had gone cold by a few minutes. I was usually the one who lowered my voice first, changed the subject first, and gave ground first. Not because I was weak, but because I understood that sometimes a family survives when one person is willing to absorb the other's sharp edges. My income was never higher than Ryan's, but my money was never just extra money. It went toward the things no one applauds: groceries, utilities, household essentials, gifts for both sides of the family on holidays, medicine when someone suddenly came down with a fever, fixing the leaking faucet, replacing the car tire Ryan said he'd deal with later and then forgot about. I was the one who remembered bill due dates, the one who scheduled maintenance for the heater, the one who reminded him of his mother's birthday, the one who picked gifts carefully enough that no one felt slighted. I did the kind of work that never showed up as a big number in a bank account, but without it, the whole house would have fallen into disorder within weeks. Then Ryan got promoted. I was genuinely happy for him. I was the one who suggested making a reservation to celebrate, picked the cake he liked, and texted a few close people so they could share in the moment with him. At first, I told myself the change in him was just temporary excitement. Ryan talked more about his new salary, his new title, and how he had finally moved into a different league. His coworkers raised their glasses to him, laughed loudly, and told him he had deserved it for a long time. I stood beside him, smiling when I should, saying just enough, like a neat little part of the success story he wanted everyone to see. But some changes don't arrive with a loud crash. They arrive in someone's tone. Ryan started making half-joking, half-serious comments like, "Now I really am the breadwinner," or "We should start living in a way that matches my new income." Every time he said something like that, he would look at me for a beat too long, as if he wanted to make sure I understood exactly where I stood in the new order he had drawn up in his head. It made me uncomfortable, but I still told myself he was just drunk on the thrill of winning. I didn't want to turn my husband's happiness into a confrontation over a few tactless remarks. The real conflict started over something very small. I reminded Ryan about that month's household expenses because he had just spent a large amount on a new watch and had promised to make up his share of the bills by the weekend. I said it casually, almost like I was just reminding him of an errand. Ryan was sitting in a chair, scrolling through his phone. When he heard me, he let out a short, mocking laugh. "You're always hung up on these little expenses." I kept my voice calm. "They may be little, but they still have to be paid every month." He looked up at me, his expression a mix of annoyance and condescension. "You really do have it easy, Emma. Total freeloader." I thought I'd heard him wrong. My whole body went rigid, like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water straight against my chest. I stared at him, waiting for some sign that it had slipped out, that it was a terrible joke he would take back immediately. But Ryan didn't take it back. If anything, he leaned farther into it, with the posture of someone who believed he was stating an obvious truth. I asked slowly, "Do you really think I'm a freeloader?" Ryan shrugged. "I mean, if you look at income, I'm obviously carrying most of the weight. Don't make such a big deal out of it." Don't make such a big deal out of it. That hurt almost as much as the first thing he said. Suddenly, every bill I had quietly paid, every problem I had handled before it had the chance to become a problem, every time I had stood there and absorbed his frustration, all of it was wiped away by a single sentence delivered from a place of superiority. He wasn't just looking down on the money I earned, he was looking down on the value of my very existence in this house. I didn't yell. I didn't keep arguing either, because in that moment I understood something with absolute clarity. Ryan hadn't said it by accident. He said it because he truly believed he had risen above me. And people who want to stand above you never listen. They only want you to bow lower. I went quiet, but my mind had never been clearer. I thought back to the early years when Ryan struggled at his old job, how many shortfalls I had quietly covered without ever keeping score. I remembered the times he overspent and forgot the rent was due, and I was the one who figured it out. I even remembered the family gatherings on his side that went smoothly, only because I had prepared everything behind the scenes. If, in Ryan's eyes, I was nothing more than someone living off his money, then I was going to let him live with that belief. From that day on, I didn't argue anymore. I simply chose a different way, colder, clearer, and far fairer. If Ryan believed I was depending on him to survive, then I would pull my hands away from everything I had been quietly holding up, let him pay for it all himself, every last expense, and then we'd see who. The next morning, I got up early, like I always did, but for the first time in years, I didn't open the banking app to check what was running short this week and needed covering. I sat at the dining table, looking at the little notebook still resting in its usual corner, the one where I used to write down what needed buying, which bills were coming due, birthday gifts, for both sides of the family, even the tiny expenses nobody could name, but somehow drained money every month like water seeping through tile. I closed the notebook and tucked it into a drawer, lightly, the way you put away an old habit that has finally expired. I didn't make a scene. I didn't announce anything beyond what I had already said the night before. If Ryan believed I was a freeloader in this house, then I would stop doing all the things a freeloader should never have been doing in the first place. I stopped placing midweek grocery orders when the fridge started looking bare. I stopped buying laundry detergent, paper towels, remote batteries, trash bags, milk, coffee, the things that always showed up right on time, so reliably that everyone assumed they simply appeared on their own. I stopped quietly transferring money into our joint account whenever the balance dipped below a safe amount. I even stopped choosing gifts for both sets of parents on holidays. Ryan usually remembered only after I had already wrapped the box for him. I didn't disrupt the order of our home. I simply took my hands off the system I had been running in silence for years. Ryan, of course, interpreted that silence in the way that benefited him. For the first 2 days, he was practically pleased with himself. He moved around the house like a man who had just won an argument he believed needed to be won. That evening, when he noticed I hadn't mentioned the electric bill, the internet bill, or the weekend shopping list, he leaned against the kitchen frame and gave a thin smile. "If it's all too much pressure for you, just let me handle it. I told you I can carry everything." I looked at him for a few seconds, then answered in a voice so calm, even I barely recognized it. "Good. Then I won't bother you anymore." Maybe he was waiting for me to add one more sharp little remark so he could fire back. But I didn't give him that. Ryan curled his lip, as if my calm was a form of surrender. I let him believe that, because some people only begin to understand a problem when they have to live inside it themselves. 3 days later, the first cracks appeared. One morning, Ryan opened the fridge and called out irritably, "Where's the milk?" I was answering emails and didn't look up. "We're out." "If we're out, why didn't you buy more?" I turned to look at him. "I thought you were handling everything." He froze for a few seconds, as if that answer had landed exactly where he least wanted it to. That same evening, he rummaged under the sink and discovered the dish soap was almost gone. The next day, the washing machine flashed that we were out of detergent. Over the weekend, he got home late from work, went into the kitchen, and realized there was nothing ready to pull together into a decent dinner. The little things started piling up into a string of constant inconveniences, not dramatic enough to cry over, but persistent enough to tighten around the rhythm of daily life. Ryan still tried to act as though everything was completely under control. He drove to the supermarket at 9 at night, bought too much of one thing and forgot another, then came back irritated because he had to make a second trip. He missed the payment deadline for one of the household services, and when the internet started cutting in and out, he snapped and asked why I hadn't reminded him. I only said, "I thought the person carrying the whole house would remember." But what chilled me wasn't Ryan's fumbling. It was the way he started taking the story outside. On Sunday afternoon, I accidentally overheard him on the phone with a friend. His tone was half joking, half smug, full of false generosity. "Ever since the promotion, I'm basically handling the whole house by myself. Emma doesn't contribute anything now." He laughed the kind of laugh a person gives when he knows he has just planted a sentence poisonous enough for the listener to do the rest. That night, his mother called me. She didn't say it outright, but every word had a barb in it. When a man has just been promoted, the pressure is a lot. You should know how to support him, not leave him carrying everything alone. I listened to every word and didn't defend myself once. I knew what it felt like to be judged by people who had heard only half the truth. The more I argued, the more I would turn myself into someone begging to be believed. And I wasn't interested in doing that anymore. Ryan saw that his mother had called me, but he never asked what I had heard. He also didn't correct his friends when the cruel little jokes started. One of them came by the house, looked at me, and said matter-of-factly, "So Ryan gets promoted and suddenly becomes the only provider? That's rough." Ryan just laughed. He didn't object, didn't correct him, just let the comment hang there in the living room like a label pasted onto my forehead. From that moment on, my silence was no longer hurt. It became a boundary. That night, Ryan opened his wallet and searched for the supplementary credit card I had used for household spending. He must have assumed that if something was missing, he could just swipe the card like always, because no matter what, I had always been the one behind the scenes making everything work. He took the card to buy a few things, then came back with an unusually tight expression on his face. "The card was declined," he said, staring at me. "What did you do?" I set my glass of water down and looked straight at him. "I locked it." Ryan stood there, stunned, for several seconds. His expression changed completely, as if for the first time he truly understood that I wasn't just angry. I was pulling my hands away from the entire machine that had kept his life running all these years smoothly, and for the first time, he was beginning to see himself standing alone inside his own home. It only took me 3 days to realize that a house doesn't fall into disarray because of one big bill. It unravels because of dozens of little things that used to be quietly kept in rhythm by one person. The refrigerator emptied faster than usual, not because we were eating more, but because no one was keeping track of when we needed more milk, eggs, vegetables, paper towels, or dish soap. In the bathroom, the shampoo bottle ran down to its last drop and still sat there, as if waiting for a familiar hand to replace it automatically. The stack of mail on the kitchen counter grew thicker by the day, mixed with ads, the electric bill, insurance renewal notices, and reminders for the air conditioner maintenance schedule. Before, those things never had a chance to pile up, because I always opened them, sorted them, marked them, and handled them before they had time to become problems. Ryan started getting irritated by things he had barely even noticed before. In the morning, he opened the fridge and frowned, because there was nothing inside except a few slices of cheese, an expired yogurt, and a half-full bottle of sauce. At night, he walked past the kitchen, looked at the dishes not piled high, but no longer cleared away right on time either, and asked in a tightly restrained voice, "Why does everything in this house suddenly feel like it's working against me?" I looked up from my book, watched him for a few seconds, and answered calmly, "The house isn't against anyone, there's just no one holding it up for you anymore." Our dinners changed too, in the most unpleasant way. There were no more planned meals designed to use up what we had for the week, no more simple but balanced dishes Ryan had eaten for years, as if they simply appeared on the table by themselves. One night, he brought home fast food. Some nights, he rummaged through the cabinets for instant noodles. One night, he ate bread and snapped that there was nothing decent in the house. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I still lived there. I still cleaned up my share. I still kept everything at a decent standard. I had only stopped doing the invisible work he used to treat like air, something no one praises when it's there, but everyone suddenly feels suffocated by when it's gone. The real trouble didn't come from the empty fridge or the slapdash dinners. It came from the expenses Ryan had always assumed would be covered as long as there was money in the account. He paid the electric bill late because it got buried in the unopened mail, and he was charged a late fee. He forgot to renew the internet service on time, and when he called in a rush, he got charged a higher rate. The water filtration system was due for a filter replacement, but he didn't know that, and by the time the water pressure dropped, he was scrambling to book emergency service. None of those costs was huge on its own, but they came one after another like tiny needles, pricking him in exactly the place where his pride lived. Ryan had always only looked at the big numbers: monthly salary, savings, investments. He had never understood how everyday life gets drained away by small things when there's no one there to keep it running smoothly. Then his mother's birthday came up right in the middle of all that. Every year, I was the one who remembered the date, chose the gift, ordered the card, and reminded Ryan to call before dinner. This year, I didn't. As the day got closer, his mother called with an icy tone because she thought her son had forgotten her. The second Ryan hung up, he turned to me, face flushed red. "You knew it was my mom's birthday and you still let this happen?" I looked at him without raising my voice, but each word was sharp enough to cut straight into his swelling pride. "I only stopped doing the work you said had no value." He gave a scornful laugh and called me selfish. I nodded very slowly. "If it isn't worth acknowledging, then I'm sure you can do it yourself." The pressure from outside started tightening too. Ryan's mother didn't say anything directly to my face, but she was skilled enough to make sure everyone heard exactly what she meant. She said a man had barely gotten promoted and was already spinning out over household matters because his wife had let go the moment her feelings got hurt. And everyone knew exactly who that jab was aimed at. A few of Ryan's friends mocked him behind his back too, half joking, half not. New title. Already complaining, so what exactly could he manage? I heard all of it. I remembered all of it. But I didn't rush to defend myself. I simply kept everything I had once handled. The spending tracker, the recurring payment files, household notes, maintenance schedules, and reminders for both sides of the family. I didn't need to argue with emotion when the truth was already sitting there in black and white. Then, on Friday night, I saw Ryan sitting in front of the banking screen for a long time, and his expression was different from the first few days, when he had only been annoyed. He scrolled through the transaction history line by line, checking our joint savings account as if he hoped he had misread it. The money was dropping faster than he had expected, not because of one major shock, but because of small expenses piling up, plus late fees, plus extra service charges for things that had once always been handled before they became urgent. I watched his hand tighten around his phone, and then he opened his email and read a notice that, maybe for the first time, made him truly understand the consequences of, "We can deal with it later." The recurring payment for the car and home insurance was overdue. I had always paid it a few days early before, never making Ryan remember it, never letting any risk get close to us. This time, I left it alone. If it wasn't fixed immediately, the reinstatement fee would be high. Worse, the lapse in coverage during the interruption could trigger a whole chain of other problems. Ryan shot to his feet, clutching the printed notice from the pile of mail, and whipped around toward me. What was in his eyes then was no longer the usual irritation over everyday inconvenience. It was something heavier, harsher, mixed with anger and panic, as if he had finally seen the huge gap I had been quietly standing in front of all this time, shielding him from it. By the end of the week, Ryan walked into the kitchen looking unusually thrilled. He said the company was hosting a gathering to celebrate his new position. His boss and a few close coworkers would be there, and married couples should attend together, to round out the picture. The way he said it made everything clear. That night, I wasn't going to be treated like an equal partner. I was an accessory, the finishing touch on the successful life he was trying to stage. I watched him straighten his tie in the mirror, listened to him talk about new connections, about bigger doors opening, then nodded and agreed to go. I wanted to see for myself which version of Ryan he would bring to the place he thought he belonged. The party was held in a restaurant with a private room on an upper floor. Soft golden lighting, glasses clinking nonstop, laughter scattered across the room, but thin as paper. Ryan was nothing like he was at home. His voice was louder, his stride more confident. Every sentence sounded polished in advance to impress. He talked about the pressure of leadership, about having to carry bigger responsibilities, about new financial plans, about a future he spoke of as if it were already sitting neatly in his hands. Every time someone turned to me, he would rest a hand lightly against my back in that polite, possessive way, then pick up his story again, turning me into a visual aid for the life he wanted to show off. I sat there listening, smiling just enough, watching the way some people in the room looked at him with admiration, while others watched more carefully, as if they were already familiar with this kind of performance. Lauren, a female coworker sitting near the end of the table, caught my eye twice. Her look wasn't curious, and it wasn't pity either. It was the look of someone who knew more than what was being said aloud. I noted it and stayed quiet. Everything truly turned when one of the men raised his glass and congratulated Ryan for having both a solid career and a stable family. Ryan laughed loudly, leaned back in his chair, and said in the teasing tone he thought was charming, "Stable because I'm the one dragging the whole household upward. If my wife had to manage on her own, she'd probably still be happily freeloading." A few laughs slipped out, short and strained. Someone lowered their head and took a sip of wine. Someone else glanced at me and immediately looked away. The room was still bright, still elegant, but in that moment, it all felt so shameless it was almost funny. Ryan thought he had just landed a clever line. He even looked at me as if waiting for me to laugh along and prove he still controlled both the room and the woman sitting beside him. I set my glass down on the table. The ice tapped softly against the side, just loud enough for the people nearest us to stop talking. I turned to Ryan, keeping my voice level and clear. "If I'm a freeloader, then you should pay me back for the certification course 2 years ago when you said that one credential would change your career." The smile on his face faltered. I kept going, still looking straight at him. "You should also pay me back for the 6 months of insurance I covered when you quit your job halfway through and still hadn't worked up the nerve to tell your family. And the rent money I pulled from my personal savings, so you'd have time to interview. And the times I shifted my work schedule, canceled my own plans, sat up editing your resume at midnight, checked your meeting invites, reminded you about your boss's birthday gift, booked client dinners so you wouldn't forget. If you want to talk about who pulled whom upward, we can tell the whole story." No one was laughing anymore. Ryan went rigid. He let out a dry little laugh, trying to cut in, but I wasn't done. I didn't need to speak quickly, because facts carry more weight than impulsive emotion. "This household has been running all this time because of the things you've never had to see. The electric bill, the insurance, groceries, your mother's medication when her joints flared up, the Thanksgiving gifts sent to your family, the appointments you forgo, tea and the calls I had to make to apologize for you. If freeloading means holding someone else's life together so it doesn't break into pieces while they stand here boasting about their achievements, then I think you're using the wrong word." A silence dropped over the room, heavy enough that I could clearly hear someone set a fork down on a plate. Lauren was the first to speak. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at Ryan. "She's actually right. Last quarter, there was a time you almost missed the meeting with the audit team, and the person who called your assistant to remind them was your wife. When you were falling apart because your father was in the hospital, the person who sent the completed documents to the team at midnight was he, R2, from your email." Ryan whipped around to face Lauren. "You don't know the whole story." Lauren took a sip of water, her voice calm. "I know enough to tell the difference between a joke and an insult." From that point on, the party was no longer Ryan's stage. I could see a few people looking at him differently. The admiration that had been there at first drained away, replaced by the embarrassed silence Ryan hated most. He tried to recover by steering the conversation toward a new project, toward sales numbers, toward next quarter's goals, but every sentence he spoke seemed to drop onto the table instead of reaching anyone's ears. By the time we left, his jaw was locked tight, and the hand gripping the steering wheel stood out in cords all the way home. The moment the front door shut, he threw his keys onto the shelf hard enough to make a sharp cracking sound. "Satisfied now, Emma? You did that on purpose. You humiliated me in front of the whole company." I looked at him and saw that the glossy finish he had worn at the restaurant had shattered completely. "The person who humiliated you was the one who chose to say that." He took a step closer, his voice rising. "You know how important this position is to me. You know how much I'm juggling just to keep up appearances, to stay in step with those people. You ruined everything." I frowned. "Keep up appearances as how?" Ryan exhaled hard, and then, like something slipping out before he could stop it, he said the sentence he had probably buried for far too long. "You think that seat stays secure on its own? I just need to get through this month. I'll cover that amount soon." I went still. "What amount?" Ryan fell silent at once. But it was too late. I looked at his face, at the flash of panic that surfaced, and was immediately buried under anger, and in that instant, I understood that beneath the arrogance was another open pit, one far deeper than a single insult. After that night at the restaurant, I didn't feel humiliated in the old way anymore. the way that makes you want to argue just to win. That feeling settled fast, giving way to something much colder, the need to understand exactly what Ryan was hiding. Some things, once they've been said out loud, in front of other people, stop being slips of the tongue. They're the truth someone has been carrying around in their head for a long time. If Ryan could calmly call me a freeloader in a room full of his coworkers, then the most frightening part wasn't that he looked down on me. It was what he was relying on to feel that confident. I started piecing together details I had ignored before. Over the past 2 months, Ryan had been coming home late far more often. The excuses always sounded reasonable: entertaining clients, dinner with partners, staying later with his boss to discuss next quarter's plans. At the same time, a few new things started appearing around the house: a recurring wine subscription, a bill for a business club he used to sneer at as flashy, receipts from restaurants where I knew one meal cost as much as a week's groceries. One time, I saw a very expensive watch box in the back seat of his car. The next day, it was gone. Ryan said it was a thank you gift for an important client, then changed the subject so quickly it was obvious I wasn't supposed to ask more. If you only looked at the number on his new paycheck, anyone would think he was flying high. But the way the money was being burned gave me a very different feeling. It didn't look like someone earning more and living more comfortably. It looked like someone racing after an image of success he was terrified he hadn't truly reached. I didn't make a scene. I just started keeping track of everything: payment reminder, emails, notices mailed to the house, the history of unusual withdrawals from our joint account that I used to quietly cover so we wouldn't come up short. I created a separate folder for my personal documents, began slowly separating my own savings, and changed the passwords on any accounts tied directly to my income. For the first time in years, I looked at our financial records the way you look at an escape map. The real picture that emerged wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to chill me. Ryan had been overspending on things nobody was asking him to have: membership fees, client dinners inflated by expensive wine, purchases labeled "for the family" that were really about making him look the part in front of coworkers and relatives. There was a bill for a luxury car rental over a weekend when he had gone to visit his parents and told them the company had generously provided him with a car. Another charge he had explained away as a gift for a business partner, but the payment date lined up exactly with his direct boss's birthday. The same boss Ryan always spoke about, with a tone that mixed admiration with eagerness. I read line after line and felt a kind of bitterness so sharp it was almost funny. The man who called me a burden was using the time I poured into this home, the stability I maintained in our shared life, even my financial reliability, to patch the shell of his success. I went back through everything connected to our shared names, too: the mortgage contributions, insurance, savings, and all the money I had quietly covered whenever Ryan said there were a few extra expenses that month. Back then, I did it because I believed that in a marriage, sometimes one person carries the other. Looking at it now, I realized I had been cushioning one man's ego for far too long, a man who always needed to be admired. I even scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor, not because I was ready to file for divorce that minute, but because I needed to know where I stood if everything collapsed and what I could still protect for myself. I didn't tell Ryan everything I knew. I wanted to see how far he would keep performing, and then the chance came faster than I expected. That afternoon, I was standing at the kitchen counter sorting the mail when I noticed an envelope thicker than usual, with the credit card issuer's name printed in the top corner. I had just pulled out the letter inside when Ryan walked in. The moment he saw the bold heading, "Urgent Notice of Overdue Payment," his whole face changed. He lunged toward me so fast he dropped his keys on the floor. His hand reached the letter first, but he couldn't yank it out of mine right away. In that moment, the smugness that had been so clear on his face at the dinner cracked wide open. What was left was naked panic, the look of a man who knew his carefully balanced illusion had finally come due. Ryan held the letter with a faint tremor in his hand, and I realized that for the first time in years, the person in this house who was truly afraid wasn't me. It was him. Once I realized Ryan had been using his promotion as a curtain to hide a pile of pride-driven debt, I stopped arguing with him the way I used to. I didn't wait for his voice to soften so I could soften with it, and I didn't tell myself that when marriage gets hard, one person should just swallow a little more for the sake of peace. That was exactly when Ryan started changing tactics, as if he were trying every key he had to see which one might still open the old door where I used to stand quiet, patching things up, and blaming myself first. One day, he sat down across from me, his voice noticeably lower, and said he knew he'd been short-tempered lately, that he'd said things he never should have said. He brought up the early years, when we were building our lives together. He reminded me that I had believed in him, that I used to say marriage meant that when one person falls, the other helps them up. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Emily, husband and wife are supposed to be a team. You can't see me trapped and stand outside it like a stranger." All I felt listening to him was cold, because that word team was something he only remembered when he needed someone else to carry his share. When he was standing in front of his coworkers, he was the very one who ripped me out of that so-called partnership and turned me into a freeloader. When he saw I wasn't reacting, Ryan switched tones so fast I almost laughed. He started saying I was punishing him out of wounded pride, that I had deliberately chosen the moment when my husband was struggling to get back at him, that if this marriage fell apart, it wouldn't be because of money, but because I was too bitter, too cruel. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "The person ruining this marriage isn't the one who stopped rescuing you. It's the one who got used to trampling his wife's efforts and calling it his right." Ryan froze. Maybe he hadn't expected me to stop explaining myself with tears and start speaking in sentences too clean to twist. I brought my laptop to the dining table and opened every spending sheet I'd saved over the years. The rent from the months when he was changing jobs and his income was unstable. The health insurance premiums I covered for the most part. The times I put off replacing my car, canceled vacations, and cut nearly all my personal spending so he'd have room to build relationships at work. I even had payment schedules, what day I transferred money, which months I covered the joint credit card, so his credit score wouldn't drop. I wasn't keeping score, I was laying out facts. Ryan stared at the screen, and I could see the tension tightening across his face, inch by inch. I spoke very slowly. "The problem was never money. The problem is that you used money to grind down the dignity of the person who's had your back for years. If you really think I'm a freeloader, then what exactly are these numbers? Charity?" Ryan shot to his feet and snapped that everything I had done was for the family. "You too, so I shouldn't pretend I was the victim." I nodded. "Right, for the family, but you only call it family money when you need it. When you want to belittle me, suddenly, it becomes your money." The hardest shove came right after that. Ryan pulled his chair back in and sat down again, this time dropping the fake decency completely. He said he needed me to withdraw from my personal savings to deal with a few bills that were coming due, just temporarily, and he'd pay it back after he got through this stretch. Then he said something I knew I would remember for a very long time. "A reasonable wife doesn't keep money to herself when her husband is the one carrying the load." I looked at him for a few seconds, long enough to see clearly that he still had no idea where he had gone wrong. In his mind, my money was still a backup resource for decisions made in the service of his ego. I answered him directly. "That account is my safety fund. I'm not taking it out to patch over the consequences of your performance. And let me save you the trouble of trying to pressure me any further. I've already met with a financial advisor and spoken to a lawyer. I'm not signing anything else. I'm not co-signing anything. And I'm not taking on blind debt just because you call it a wife's duty." Ryan went still. I saw the exact moment he realized the last door out had just slammed shut in his face. His anger flared instantly. He asked me when I had gone this far, whether I had been quietly planning my exit behind his back. I told him, "I'm not preparing to betray you. I'm preparing so you can't keep pushing me in front of the car and calling it a sacrifice." He slammed his hand down on the table and said I was destroying everything he had built. But this time, I didn't back down. I understood it too clearly now. If I gave even one step, I would be right back where I started. The soft cushion he could fall onto every time his ego collided with reality. Then Ryan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face changed immediately. No more anger, no more raised voice, just a flash of pallor that showed for a second before he tried to swallow it down. He answered, and only said a few short things. "Yes, I understand. I'll be there, right away." When the call ended, the hand holding his phone was trembling slightly. I hadn't seen Ryan like that since the day he got promoted. I looked at him, and he stared into the empty space in front of him, as if he had just realized the collapse was no longer contained inside this house. It had reached the very place he had once used to step on me. The next morning, after our unfinished conversation, Ryan didn't apologize. He didn't even try the softer tone he'd been using the past few days. He switched fully into irritability, snapping at everything, angry at the slightest thing, as if the whole world had conspired to shove him into a corner. At work, the rumors about his unusual entertainment expenses still hadn't died down. At home, the bills arrived right on time, cold and precise as slaps. His phone kept buzzing sometimes. The bank? Sometimes an unknown number he would only answer after stepping out onto the balcony. The confidence that had once made him think he could define my worth with a single sentence was starting to crack apart. By late afternoon, Ryan told me that his mother, his sister Megan, and an uncle he was close to would be coming over that evening. He said this needed to be cleared up in front of the adults in the family, his tone making it sound as though I were the one who had caused all of this damage. I looked at him for a few seconds, then nodded. This time, I wasn't agreeing so I could defend myself. I agreed because it was finally time for the truth to be laid out on the table, right in front of the people who had only heard the story the way he chose to tell it. The air in the living room was so tense it felt like one wrong sentence would shatter everything. Ryan started first. He said I had changed after he got promoted, that I had become controlling about money, stopped sharing expenses, left him to handle everything on his own, and then humiliated him in front of his coworkers. He said I was cold, stubborn, unfeeling, that I had abandoned my husband at the exact moment he was under the most pressure. His mother sighed when he finished. His uncle shook his head, already looking prepared to take his side. I let Ryan say it all. I didn't interrupt. I didn't look down. I didn't rush to defend myself the way I used to. When the room finally went quiet, I asked just one question. Do you remember the word you used for me in front of the whole dinner table that night? Ryan froze. I continued, slow and clear. Freeloader, that's what you called me. You said it like you'd believed it for a long time, like everything I do in this house, in this life, has no value just because my name isn't attached to the bigger paycheck. I opened the folder I had brought with me. One page after another, I laid them on the table. Utility statements, insurance payments, the amounts I had quietly covered when he came up short on his credit card, the payments I made on the car he still drove to meet clients, even the times I had moved my own plans around just to keep our home and our life from falling apart. I didn't need to raise my voice. The numbers were sharp enough on their own. I locked down my money after I found out you were using your increased income to fund an image you couldn't actually afford, I said. You bought watches, picked up dinners beyond your means, paid in advance for a life that wasn't really yours yet, and then came home and looked at me like I was the burden. You called me a freeloader while you were the one living off my invisible labor, my organization, my ability to keep clearing the path every time you stumbled. Megan, Ryan's sister, was the first one to speak. She looked at the pile of paperwork, then turned to her brother, her voice not loud but firm. Emily covered your car insurance twice last year. I heard you say you'd pay her back. You never did. The moment she said it, the entire room shifted. His uncle sat up straighter. Ryan's mother looked at him as if she were trying to reconcile the son she thought she knew with the man sitting in front of her. My phone buzzed. It was Lauren. I hadn't intended to pull anyone from his workplace into a family matter, but her message was only one line. You need to know he was just put on hold for the team manager role tonight, not because of gossip, but because there are problems in his expense reports. I set the phone down and looked at Ryan. His face went white. He shot to his feet and shouted that I had set him up, that I was destroying him. For the first time, the mask of the wronged husband fell away completely, revealing a man who was panicked and furious because he was losing control of the story. I stood up too. No, Ryan, what's destroying you is the fact that you believed earning more money gave you the right to look down on the person beside you. I did not abandon you when things got hard. I just stopped being the cushion for your ego. He looked at me, his eyes pleading and resentful at the same time. Maybe that was the moment he finally understood that I had truly stepped out of the old role I used to occupy, the one where I kept trying to hold on to the good parts of a marriage that had already been rotting from the inside. I picked up the folder, and what I felt was no longer blind anger, but a hard, lucid calm. I looked directly at everyone in the room and said, I am not going back to the way we lived before. I will not keep rescuing a man who calls his wife's sacrifices freeloading. Tomorrow morning, I'll give my final answer. But tonight is the last night I will let other people debate my worth right in front of me. That night ended in a strange kind of silence. After Ryan's mother's weak attempts to defend him finally died out, after Megan sat there stunned by the realization that her brother had hidden his debt, hidden all the showy spending, and then pushed part of that burden onto me, I no longer felt the need to say anything else to prove my point. I had said enough. Ryan had exposed enough on his own. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, made myself a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and reviewed the bank statements, the short-term apartment lease, and the appointment with the lawyer I had made the night before. I wasn't shaking. Maybe because when someone has been pushed so far that there's nowhere left to retreat, calm arrives like one last reflex to save yourself. When Ryan came out of the bedroom, I told him to sit down. I spoke slowly, clearly, without raising my voice. I told him I was choosing a separation first, that I would be separating all finances that very week and moving into my own place for as long as it took to look at this marriage with a clear head. I told him that if he wanted to save this marriage, there were 4 things he would have to do. Fully disclose all debts and financial obligations, stop diminishing or distorting my contributions in any way, commit seriously to marriage counseling, and take responsibility for the consequences of what he had caused instead of dumping them on me like before. I looked him straight in the eye and said the thing I should have said a long time ago. I'm not leaving because of one insult. I'm leaving because behind that insult is an entire way you see me, use me, and take me for granted. Ryan sat there silently for a long time. His face no longer held the arrogance he wore the day he called me a freeloader. Maybe for the first time, he understood that some things are lost, not because of one argument, but because too many acts of disrespect pile up into a crack that can't be patched over with a softened tone and a few quieter words. He asked me if it really had to go this far. I answered very gently, "You're the one who brought it here." In the days that followed, I moved into a small apartment near my work. I changed my accounts, transferred the payments that were in my name, and canceled the things I had quietly kept in place to make Ryan's life look more stable than it really was. Once I was no longer there behind the scenes, he had to face every bill, every debt collection call, every payment schedule piling up on top of work. The way he had spent money to build the image of a successful man now came back and tightened around him in the very language he trusted most. Numbers. I didn't need to watch him fall apart to feel vindicated. It was enough to know he no longer had anywhere to hide behind titles, status, and bragging. As for me, what came first was not some grand happiness, but an ordinary kind of relief. I bought a new set of bed sheets without having to hear someone ask whether it was really necessary. I ate a quiet dinner without having to guess the mood of the person across from me just to avoid another outburst. I went to sleep without feeling like I had to wake up early and keep patching the holes someone else had made. There are small kinds of peace that seem so ordinary you once mistake them for nothing. Only now did I understand that they are exactly what a decent marriage is supposed to have. I used to think love was enough to keep a home standing. After everything, I understand that love without fairness and respect is just an excuse for one person to keep sacrificing while the other treats it as something owed. The day Ryan called me a freeloader was the day I was forced to face the truth. The one being worn down was not him, but me through invisible labor, through endurance, through all the times I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. Now, I no longer need Ryan to recognize my worth. I did that for myself the moment I dared to pull my hand away. I did not destroy my marriage by setting boundaries. Disrespect had already done that long before. And the hardest lesson I carry with me is this. Standing up for yourself is not selfish. It is the only way to keep from being erased in your own life.